So welcome everyone to another seminar on our seminar series of the System Dynamics Society. If you don't know me, I'm Fernando Redivo. I'm the Marketing and Communications Director for the System Dynamics Society. And unfortunately, our Executive Director, Rebecca Nyons, she's on vacation these days, so she won't be joining us, but she told me to say hello for all of you, including especially for Beth. So here today we're talking about multi-solving, working with complexity and interconnection. And I really hope that by the end of this webinar, we learned a little bit more about this tool and how to work with this complex world. And I just want to remind you guys about the benefits of being a member of the System Dynamics Society. We have dozens of benefits, but here are some highlighted ones. So you get free access to all society seminar series, such as this one here today. You get a great discount in our annual conference, a discount on our partners' online courses, access to mentorship programs. You also get full access to the System Dynamics Review, the Society's journal, and also exclusive prices on our bookshop. So if you're not a member yet or you're about to renew, just go to systemdynamics.org/membership. You'll find more about the membership benefits. And this is just to save the date. It's exciting for you. It's the first time I'm announcing this, that our International System Dynamics Conference is coming to Chicago next year. It didn't happen in live last year because of COVID, but we're going there next year in 2023. So you can save the date for 23 and to 27th of July. And the theme of the conference is adapting in the face of change. So you can also be prepared to submit your papers for the conference. And if you're planning to learn more about system dynamics and learning how to model system dynamics, of course, the summer school is the best opportunity to do so. We're going to have the intro and the intermediate track, and just before the conference in July 2023 too. So you can save the date. And if you want to learn more about the summer school, you can go to systemdynamics.org/summer-school. And just a quick and loud shout out for all sponsors of the society. It's only through their help that we are able to continue doing the amazing work that we do with the society and expand the system dynamics field. Thank you so much. So if you want to maybe become a sponsor, you can email me at office@systemdynamics.org and we start a conversation from there. And this is no novelty for you guys, but we probably, if you're not familiar with Poll Everywhere, I'm going to give you some minutes for you to go to this link in the chat, and I have to grab it. Let me see if I have it. Oh, no. So you can scan this QR code on the screen, our screen, or go to pollf.com/Multisolving Institute 560. And let me just find, oops, sorry. Let me find the link here. So make your life easier. There is a link in the chat you can paste to your browser. I'm going to start with a very intro question just for us to get warmed up here. This fine. Make this active, and just a quick question as for you guys to go there. If you haven't made your way, there's a link in the chat. And also you can join to pollf.com/Multisolving Institute 560. And you know, seminar series is always a great chance for us to see each other, and we usually cover a lot of time zones, and I see a lot of people from Africa. It's a great continent. I would love to know which country are you guys joining us from. Australia, Germany, New York, I suppose, Norway, the UK, Chile. Thanks for joining us, guys. I see some people. So we're going to have a Q&A and other posts throughout Poll Everywhere, throughout the Brett's presentations, and we're going to use Poll Everywhere to do it. So if you have any questions, you'll be able to submit them very soon. So thanks so much. Thanks a lot for joining us today. I'm just going to stop here. This one and continue with my presentation here. Just a quick agenda for today. Pat is presenting for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. Sometimes it's not that plenty, but 20 minutes of Q&A. so you can submit your questions very soon through Go Everywhere. And I'm going to briefly introduce you to Elizabeth Shelley from the Multisolving Institute. And she's the founder and director of the Multisolving Institute that she recently funded in the beginning of the year. She's an expert on solutions that address climate change while also improving health, well-being, equity, and economic vitality. That writes and speaks about multisolving climate change and leadership in complex systems for both in the US and internationally. And her work has been published widely throughout the world. And Beth co-founded Climate Interactive in 2010 and served as Climate Interactive's co-director from 2010 until last year, 2021. She trained in system dynamics and sustainability with Dana Meadows and worked at the Sustainability Institute, the research institute founded by Meadows herself. For 13 years, she worked there. And she's here today with us, and that's all from my side, Beth. Thank you so much for being here. I look forward for your presentation.
Thanks so much, Fernando. Really excited to be here. So I guess we'll share my screen.
Yeah.
And we'll go to my PowerPoint. Okay.
Yeah, I can see your screen.
Everything working? Okay, I just have a few extra windows I need to close. Great, well, here we go. And I will try to keep my remarks kind of brief and focused, because I think the rich part of this conversation really that I'm excited for will be the Q&A and hopefully some back and forth mediated as best we can through Zoom. Well, some of these important people were mentioned. Fernando, thank you for that great introduction. But because we're all here part of the system dynamics family tree, I think there's many familiar names, and I just wanted to acknowledge influences on all of the work that I'm going to talk about today. So Dana Meadows, I brought out some of my favorite Dana Meadows quotes sprinkled throughout this talk. Of course, Climate Interactive, which is the place where the multi-solving idea first took shape, and then the many partners like John Sturman and Tom Fitteman, many other, Jack Homer, great system dynamicists. Some of you might even be here somewhere in this Zoom conglomeration. Then some of our partners on the ground, like the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District, which is really getting quite concrete about multi-solving. Partnership for Southern Equity in Atlanta. People involved in that work include Chris Soderquist and Tina Anderson-Smith and many others, and apologies if I forgot to name important ones. And also many funding partners. This work wouldn't be possible without a lot of support from lots of different people over the years. So we're going to go back to Poll Everywhere, so you might even still have that window open. And the first question that I want to start with, because this is really the point of why we're here and the point of multi-solving, what's vulnerable today in your world and the big world? So I'm going to go activate that poll. And you should be able to start typing those answers. What's vulnerable? You might be thinking about Pakistan, 1/3 underwater right now. China, 70 days, 75 days of unprecedented heat wave. Yeah, everything. Livelihoods, biodiversity, peace, democracy, people, future, supply chains, nature, governance, respect. That's a lot, right? The premise of multi-solving, and if you've got a busy day, I'm going to tell you the punchline right now with this word cloud that we're creating. The premise of multi-solving is that some of these things that are vulnerable are easier to protect if we can figure out how to bundle them together and how to approach them together. Now, you all as systems experts, it's probably not as shocking of a thing to say as it is in a lot of the audiences that I talk with. But keep that in mind. Think of this as like a little puzzle, like which of the words up here on my screen right now could you draw circles around to bound into a bigger system where solutions are actually easier than they are individually in silos. That's what we're going to talk about for the next hour. So this is a picture of a climate solution. It's called the Walk to School project, and it happened across the UK a few years ago. It reduced emissions from the transport sector because children were suddenly able to walk to school. It was basically a project to create safe routes. So they would do audits of traffic and other hazards with the schools, with children and parents, and with city officials and nonprofits in these communities. So they made it a lot more possible for kids to walk to school. That was a climate solution. I'm going to show you another slide. This slide is a picture of a health solution. And in fact, this project Walk to School started in response to an epidemic of children not getting the recommended amounts of daily physical activity. So it actually, although it had climate benefit, it started as a health project. This is a jobs and economic equity project. You'll notice I'm not actually changing the slide, right? Zoom is working, but I'm trying to give you a feel for what's happening around the world, solutions that are bundled together to multiple problems. So now suddenly parents didn't have to leave work to get their children home from school. They could safely make those journeys. It's a congestion, traffic congestion solution, right? There used to be traffic backlogs around the schools at drop off and pickup time. That improved. In this project, it was something like 25% reduction in transportation emissions on the school trips back and forth, and 33% more children getting the recommended amount of daily physical activity with all of the health and social benefits that come with that. And in this project, when they did a full audit of the costs versus the benefits, including saving money on vehicles, kids' health improvements, impacts on the healthcare system, greenhouse gas reductions, they estimated that the benefits were almost 6 times the cost of this project. This is a project in New Zealand called Warm Up New Zealand, and it started as a jobs project. It started in response to the 2008-2009 financial crisis. It was motivated by getting the construction sector back to work, and it was an energy efficiency project led by the Energy Efficiency or Energy Ministry of New Zealand. And they retrofitted people's homes with insulation, windows, and boilers. And it was a successful jobs program in getting that sector back to work. But they did an interesting thing in New Zealand. They did a health audit of what happened for the people who were living in those buildings. And they found reduced costs for hospitalizations and medicine simply because people were living in healthier, warmer, tighter homes. So what started as a jobs program turned out to have health benefits. And understanding that led the health ministry to get involved and led to a provision where doctors could refer patients for home energy improvements. So sometimes we joke, like, instead of take an aspirin and call me in the morning, it's like, get new windows, get new insulation in the attic. So these are examples of multi-solving, which we define as using one investment of time or effort to solve several problems at once. And we emphasize that multi-solving does this in a way that also improves equity. And I'll have more to say about that throughout the hour. So here's my first Donella Meadows quote for you. And for anyone who doesn't know, Donella Meadows was one of the authors of the Club of Rome study that's just having its 50th anniversary this year. And she was a mentor to many of us in the system dynamics and system thinking communities. So she wrote a column on systems called The Global Citizen. And one of them, she said, what we are rarely told is that solutions are as interconnected as problems. One good environmental action can send out waves of good effects as impressive as the chain of disasters that result from environmental evil. So multi-solving is kind of the other side of the coin that we as systems thinkers often find ourselves talking to people about, right? We're always worried about unintended consequences and thinking about longer chains of causation and bigger boundaries in time and space. Usually we're talking about that because we're trying to help people avoid making problems worse or creating new problems. But the other side of it, of seeing this interconnection, which is just a feature of the world and isn't actually good or bad, it just is. We live in an interconnected whole system. The other side of that interconnected whole systemness isn't just ripples of problems, but it's also ripples of solutions. And that's what we're really interested in when we think about multi-solving. It helps people to have maps to think of the types of boundaries that multi-solving can cross. So we've created a tool that I'll say a little bit more about later, but we call it FLOWER, and it stands for the Framework for Long-Term Whole System Equity-Based Reflection. But really, it's just a reminder. That's a mouthful, but it's a reminder about some of the most common types of co-benefits we see in the case studies we've looked at, like that Walk to School or Warm Up New Zealand project. Around the edges are 7 different kinds of co-benefits: health and well-being, jobs and livelihoods, resilience, energy and mobility, food and water, protection of clean water and healthy food and access to it, climate protection, and biodiversity. And at the center of the flower is a really important co-benefit that we call connection. That means connections between people and nature, across silos, across scales. Sometimes we talk about it as rewiring systems. And generally, it's a co-product of efforts to work together across all these petals of the flower. And it's a co-product that produces benefits of its own in terms of systems being more intelligent and more resilient. There's more about flower on our website, which is multisolving.org. And we're super excited to have just released a bunch of tools where you can do what we call the flower exercise with groups of people online. So check that out at multisolving.org. Sometimes the best way to give a sense of multi-solving is to talk about what I think of as champions, like examples that where multi-solving is particularly prominent. So here's some of my favorites, and I'm sure you all have others, but here's a few to sort of stimulate your imagination. Trees and green space, right? They help the urban environment stay cooler in the face of rising temperatures. They improve physical and mental health of the people around them. They save energy, mostly by keeping things cooler. They help manage the stronger and more intense rainfalls that many places around the world are having, because they help water slow down and soak in. Walking and cycling, we saw that as an example of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation, but the health benefits of making it safe for people who are able to move around on foot or on bicycle are enormous, as many of you who work in health know, in terms of preventing chronic disease. And then there's economic benefits. There's study after study that show that streets where people move through slowly on foot or on bicycle actually are an economic boon for the commerce that happens on those streets. And often that effect alone outweighs the cost of building the infrastructure needed for that. Public transportation, another source of reducing emissions from transportation, but getting around, mobility is one of the key factors in people moving out of poverty around the world, access to healthcare, schooling, opportunities, work. And so public investment in the public good in terms of transportation and mobility is definitely a multi-solving champion. Renewable energy, both in places where it's replacing polluting energy. Fossil fuels, as you know, have enormous consequences for people's health, particularly from air pollution, small particles like PM 2.5 that are linked to all sorts of diseases, from respiratory illness, cardiovascular disease, premature birth, dementia. The pollution from fossil fuels is bad for us long before it changes the climate. So renewable energy is a solution to that. It also, in places that don't have access to the grid, renewable energy is an engine of economic opportunity, access to refrigeration, lighting for children to study at night. So multi-solving just kind of ripples out of renewable energy. Energy efficiency, like that Warm Up New Zealand case. Another benefit that I didn't mention, so we talked about reducing emissions, providing jobs, improving health. It also reduces what's called the energy burden, the percentage of someone's income that they spend keeping their house warm or cool. And the energy burden is the highest for the people who live on the least amount of income. So reducing the energy burden by having people need less energy, therefore less out of pocket for energy, means more money remaining for food and health and education and recreation. So energy efficiency, if it's done with the energy burden in mind, can also be an economic equity intervention. So those are some of my favorite multi-solving champions. In a second, we'll go back to Pull Everywhere, and you all can add some. But here's another way that I like to think about multi-solving. I never thought I'd necessarily be having Dwight Eisenhower quotes in my presentation, but I like this one. He said, "Whenever I run into a problem I can't solve, I always make it bigger. I can never solve it by trying to make it smaller, but if I make it big enough, I can begin to see the outlines of a solution." And that's what we're talking about here. And it's pretty countercultural to how I was trained. I was trained as a scientist, a biologist at MIT, very reductionistic, cells were too big for us. We studied individual molecules. So I was definitely schooled in a break problems down into smaller pieces in order to solve them, which is sometimes exactly what we need. But there's a lot of problems we face that aren't yielding to that approach. And I see evidence around the world that they can yield to this approach, which is to make the problems bigger. And we'll talk about why that helps in a minute. But before we do that, let's go back to Pull Everywhere. You saw my favorite champions. What are some others that you know of, maybe in your neighborhood or in your work, where you see problems being bundled? And here's how I'd like you to give your answers, if you would, is sort of name the solution, like an urban orchard, and then name some of the problems it solves, like lack of food access, heat risk, lack of job opportunities. So let's go to Pull Everywhere. Not that. Lost my window. Hold on, guys.
Do you want me to share my screen?
Nope, we got it. Thanks, Fernando. Okay. So bike share, absolutely. Market priced parking, free healthcare. Yeah, health is a key multi-solving solution in the sense that people who are healthier are more economically productive, are more able to give back to their communities. Farmers markets, community solar, congestion pricing, agroecology, health, water resources, soil, human health, soil health, local action, and equity. Development on a wetland. Wondering about what that one is. Solar geysers for rural communities with feed-in tariffs. Energy access. Development of parks and green space. Solar panel subsidies. Right, and particularly if those can include access for economically disadvantaged groups. Didn't get a lot of press, but in the last month, the Biden administration had a new initiative on access to renewable energy for marginalized communities that I think is a great multi-solving example. Remote work, shared mobility, pedestrian safety. Yeah, great. So I'm loving these. These are all the kinds of things and more that are happening around the world. We think of multi-solving as a movement, and the number of examples you all are coming up with is just more evidence of that. It's a movement, but it's sort of in different faces in every place. Like, oh, I work on farmers markets, I work on bikes, I work on community composting. People don't always see the pattern that connects these different initiatives, and that's part of why we think the word multi-solving is important, to give a shared identity to that. Okay, so I'm going to just keep us moving at this brisk pace so we have time for questions. I want to share 4 reasons to multi-solve. There are others, but these I think are the most important. The first one is for justice and equity. So I think no matter what part of the world, what part of the United States you're in, you're probably aware of challenges around justice and equity, whether it's gender equity, racial equity, economic equity, and so on. We live in inequitable systems. multi-solving is an opportunity to do what we need to do to address other problems, like climate change is a prominent one, and to do it in a way that recreates those systems to be more equitable. Here's an example of the scale of the opportunity. So this isn't my slide, it's from a group at Princeton, the REPEAT. It's basically an energy policy modeling team at Princeton called REPEAT. And they did an analysis of the Inflation Reduction Act here in the United States, this new, very big spending plan for addressing climate change. And they looked at how this spending compares to historic spending on energy in the United States. So just to orient you, this is time from 1950 to the present and then on into the future. And the y-axis is gigawatts of energy capacity added each year. So the first thing you see is that there's this really a step change in the amount of investment in an energy system. So when I talk about if we're having to recreate the world, let's do it equitably. Think about the current energy system, the fossil fuel energy system. Are women equally represented in it in the United States? No. Are Black people, people of color represented equally in it? No, they're not. So we're about to create new opportunities for generating wealth and employment. If that can be done with a multi-solving mindset, there's a chance to create a more equitable energy system than we have today. So that's one of the first reasons to multi-solve. We have to do this investment and work anyway. Let's do it in a way that creates a more just society that we aspire to. A second reason to multi-solve is frankly just to win against vested interests. And again, I'll use an example from climate change. This is now a fairly old paper by Paul Epstein and his group, who did a really interesting full cost accounting of all the costs of a year's worth of burning coal in the United States. And we took that data and turned it into a pie graph. And what I want you to notice is the dark piece of the pie. That's the cost to the climate, or the cost of climate disasters, floods, fires, et cetera, from a year's worth of burning coal. And look at the other pieces of the pie. Basically, those light blue pieces are about health, either health in the places where coal is extracted, or health anywhere that coal is burned in the United States in terms of the air pollution effects on people. So what you notice is that the climate movement, if it's focused narrowly on the CO2 that comes from coal, is missing, right, huge amounts of the problem in terms of health, but also huge amounts of the solution. Think of the budgets of the voters, of the alliances, treating this as a whole system problem instead of a climate problem and a health problem. So an encouraging thing is that I would say the climate movement is becoming more and more integrated in this way. There's now so many initiatives that bring doctors and health institutions into alignment with climate organizations, but it hasn't always been that way. But if you think about just what does it take to overcome the power of some of the wealthiest industries in human history, as Bill McKibben calls them, certainly starting by understanding all of the problems that emanate from those industries and tackling them together is just strategic in my mind. A third reason to multi-solve is to unite timescales. If we break free of fossil fuels today, we improve well-being pretty immediately. Air pollution from climate change, from burning fossil fuels, right? It falls out of the air within days after you stop burning, whereas the climate protection benefits happen decades later in the century. And so where sometimes we feel this tension between what people need today and what people will need in the future, and those are always really difficult moral choices. Multi-solving focuses on where those interests align. And one thing I say to people is like, let's exhaust all the opportunities where the future and the present are taken care of together. Like, let's do everything on that list first before we start worrying about sacrificing in the present to benefit the future. So that's another thing that the multi-solving lens allows you to do is put those pieces together. It's connected to that last reason also, I would say, about winning some of these battles that we face. Most political leaders, for instance, their terms of office are not related, are much shorter than the climate benefits, right? They may take action whose benefits will never happen in their term of office, but people having better transportation, more mobility, cleaner air, cleaner water, those things can happen in a politically relevant timescale. So that's another reason multi-solving makes sense, is you can bundle the things that are off in the future with the things that matter to people today. And often those short-term benefits are also more local, which is an important part of the political action, sort of political element of decision making. And maybe we can talk more about that in the chat at the end. And then the last reason is just, frankly, fiscal responsibility. Like, if you can solve multiple problems with $1, why wouldn't you do that? I was talking not long ago with a conservation funder who has added health and equity to their goals. And one reason that they talked about was, with inflation, $1 million doesn't buy as much land as it used to. But can we use that $1 million and that investment in land in ways that also will improve people's health and improve equity and justice? That's a way to get more for the same investment. So it's, you know, you can be as fiscally conservative as the next guy and advocate for multi-solving. So multi-solving seems amazing. I'm excited about all these stories. I gave you 4 reasons why it matters. But here's the sad news I have to offer, is that there's a huge gap between what I think is possible and what we currently see with multi-solving. And I'm going to go through a few really quick examples. Fernando has some of the studies behind this that he can put in the chat for people who want to read more. The first one is about what we've just lived through with COVID and the huge amount of spending in terms of fiscal stimulus around the world, which I say is basically a lost opportunity for multi-solving. At the beginning of the pandemic, a group of scientists did a study because they knew a bunch of spending was about to happen. And they calculated $1.4 trillion a year would be enough over the next 4 or 5 years to get the whole world on track to meet Paris Agreement goals. So $1.4 trillion a year. Now we know the world spent something like $17 trillion on COVID-19 economic recovery. So this is the 17 trillion that was spent. This is what those scientists said would be needed per year, 1.4 trillion. This is what actually happened in terms of stimulus dollars that were used to stimulate the economy and invest in clean energy. In other words, what fraction of this 1.4 trillion? And it was around 480 billion. And some even went in the wrong direction. That's the G20 spending on fossil energy. I think it was 330 billion or something like that. So I would say a huge missed opportunity for multi-solving. Not all of the 17 trillion needed to go into clean energy, but some of it could and much of it didn't. The World Health Organization comes out with a study almost every year that says the health benefits resulting from meeting the Paris Agreement targets would outweigh the costs of those energy system and transportation system changes. They said it in 2021. I expect they'll say it this year too. And yet, by and large, we know that most countries are not on track to doing that level of ambitious mitigation, even though for the whole system, it would net out as a win. And in fact, I have a next poll everywhere question for you, which is this one. Well, we might have lost it. Fernando and I did a last minute poll everywhere. Shift.
Which question is that, Beth, so I can put it on?
No, that's okay. We'll, to save time, we'll keep going. What I want you to do instead of poll everywhere is just write down on a piece of paper in your own head the answer to this question. Like, what % of countries do you think have climate plans that include health considerations, or are making, according to the World Health Organization, are making climate policy with health in mind? So I'll give you a second. Is it 10%, 75%, somewhere in between? Okay, and I'm going to tell you what the World Health Organization said. they said that about 1 in 5, so 20% of countries right now or in 2021 are connecting health co-benefits in their analysis and their development of climate policy. So when I talk about the multi-solving gap, that's what I mean. Like 20% of countries are seizing that opportunity. About a third of what was needed to seize that climate and COVID-19 economic recovery synergy actually happened. Why is there a gap like that? We think of it in terms of multi-solving obstacles that people who are trying to do this work report to us. So what are they? Here's a handful, and I have a feeling these will be very familiar to all of you who work in systems. The first thing is people have to climb, if they want to get, from working in silos to working in a multi-solving way to seize these opportunities, they have to cross what I think of as the mountains of disciplinarity. Everybody is trained in a different institution, speaks a different language, makes policy in a different way. They have to somehow forge across the swamp of budgetary silos. Think about that transportation walk to school project, right? It was a transportation initiative that paid off with a lot of health benefits. Or think about those statistics I told you about how building bike infrastructure actually brings more economic returns to a business district, right? Well, transportation budgets don't usually get made by the Economic Development Authority or the Health Authority. So, and a lot of times the place where costs fall is different than the place where benefits land. And that's a real obstacle to multi-solving. There's the jurisdictional river. Sometimes, well, I'll give you a concrete example, actually. We talked about urban flooding with more intense rainfalls. Sometimes the best protection for an urban area might be upstream in a watershed to invest in protecting wetlands that can capture and slow the water. But those are outside of city limits. And so the city might actually have money to invest, but no control over decisions made way upstream in a watershed. That's a jurisdictional barrier to what might be the best solution for everybody involved. So that has to be surmounted sometimes to multi-solve. There's the forest of inequity. Think about what we're talking about in the energy system, but it's true across almost all systems, health and education, economic systems. There's historic inequity in the structure of systems. And to multi-solve in a way that reverses and undoes that are really difficult conversations about justice, equity, ethics, but also systemic structures, reparations, harm. Those are hard conversations that many leaders don't feel equipped to lead. So that is another obstacle to multi-solving. And then the last one I think of as the desert of unfamiliarity. I told you I was trained as a scientist to break problems down into their smaller pieces. Most people have experienced some version of that. A lot of what's required for multi-solving doesn't look like much action is happening. At least at first, it looks like people sitting around talking and learning together. And it's not uncommon in multi-solving projects we've looked at for people to be like, what are we doing here? Because there's nothing big got built today. There isn't something we can put a plaque on. We just understood ourselves and the whole system better. Here's how Donella Meadows named this challenge or all these barriers that I've been talking about. She said, and this was in 1982, she said, the world is a complex, interconnected, finite, ecological, social, psychological, economic system. We treat it as if it were not, as if it were divisible, separable, simple, and infinite. Our persistent, intractable global problems arise directly from this mismatch. I would say the multi-solving gap also arises directly from this mismatch. There's these opportunities we can't seize because we aren't organized to seize them. So I want to open us soon to conversation. And I think that, let's see, I just looked at my watch. We have about 20 minutes left. So I'm going to skip the poll and we'll kind of get into this just in the question and answer instead. I'll give you a couple of my thoughts about the answer to this question. how can our fields of systems thinking, system dynamics, and complexity, how can we help people overcome these obstacles? So I'll share a few thoughts, and then let's use part of the Q&A to get more into that question. One way I think is that we can help people create maps. That's one of the jobs, I think, of our flower tool, even if it's just a very simple reminder. Hey, you've got a project in energy and mobility. Could it do any good for food and water? What about jobs and livelihoods? Flower is a tool that's meant to prompt discussions and figure out how to add more co-benefits into a project. It's also a tool to remind people to talk about the distribution of burdens and benefits within each of those co-benefits. And if you look at our flower exercise, you'll see there's very explicit questions about that. So the maps can prompt people to see how these pieces fit together. Maps can also look like this. This one is one that I made with Chris Soderquist in partnership with a whole bunch of people in the city of Atlanta, who started out with projects that were focused on improving infrastructure and were really worried about the potential for displacement and gentrification as the attractiveness of neighborhoods increased. And so this mapping exercise helped people who are building parks understand that they needed alliances with people who are working on affordable housing if they were going to avoid some negative consequences that really weren't aligned with their values. So mapping can help people see how and you all know this, but just sort of stating the obvious, that one way we can help people multi-solve is to give them maps of how different parts of systems fit together. I think we can also help when it comes to fostering effective conversations. And so we say there's no perfect flower diagram. We say the perfect flower diagram is the one that spurred a good conversation. And people might look at the same policy and draw different flower diagrams, and we really would celebrate that if they had a quality conversation about it. A lot of the multi-solving projects that we've been really honored to participate in, look like this. They basically look like people who come from different sectors, who come from formal power and informal power, or who come from national organizations and local organizations, figuring out where their common interests meet. In our project in Milwaukee, I'll vividly remember this moment when the Children's Asthma Coalition leader and the Milwaukee Riverkeeper organization leader met for the first time, because we, out-of-state systems thinkers, invited them to the same meeting, and they realized all the ways in which their two issues, children's health and water health, could be aided by the same investments. So conversations that help people forge connections is a huge contribution to multi-solving. We also can help multi-solving, I think, by offering quantitative tools and mathematical modeling. And I'd put a big asterisk on this. So here's what I mean. Here's examples of a couple pictures. This is that Milwaukee project I mentioned. It was about green infrastructure. And this is the interface that Chris Soderquist built off of a Stella model to show, I don't know, I think it was 10 different co-benefits that would move up or down depending on investments in green infrastructure versus gray infrastructure. And this is a group of city leaders choosing between those scenarios and understanding the implications of them. This is a picture of the En-ROADS tool, which I bet many of you have looked at. And just to shout out, one way that this global model includes a co-benefit for health is to look at whenever you make an En-ROADS scenario, you can look at its implications for air pollution, and then by extension, all of the health issues that come along with changes in air pollution. So those are some ways that mathematical modeling can start to bring multi-solving in. The asterisk is to name the challenges. We talked about how excellent it was in multi-solving that you have the ability to talk about benefits on different timescales. That's suddenly kind of challenging if you're going to build a model and you want it to run fast and be easy to use. Think about that green infrastructure model in Milwaukee. We wanted to show it over the lifetime of capital, so decades, but some of those changes, like ability to absorb rainfall, the rainfall events were happening in hours or days. So you have this challenge of time scales. There's also the challenge of spatial scales. It was actually pretty tricky for the team who worked on this air pollution part of En-ROADS to figure out how to represent what's really a local phenomenon, right? Air pollution is going to depend on how close you are to a fossil fuel combustion and which way the prevailing winds are blowing. At some point, you can't have a global model that is fast and effective, giving you that kind of detailed level information. So I think that to the extent we want to use mathematical models and system dynamics models for multi-solving, I think their best use is likely to be learning labs that are generalizable rather than trying to help everybody multi-solving have their own model of their own specific situation. But that would be another fascinating thing for the chat. So I think there's more to do for our fields to contribute to multi-solving, and I'll name 3 challenges and then I'll stop. So one, I think, is tracking and documenting impacts. We already talked about different time scales and spatial scales. Then there's the causal complexity. A lot of multi-solving benefits ripple out into other benefits. And the people doing this work on the ground tell us that it's overwhelming to try to do the work and figure out how to document and share it, but they need to do that to get the support they need to keep doing the work. This runs across all of our work, but it's important to say is just the time pressure, the escalating level of need, the crisis conditions in which many multi-solvers are working. I don't think we solve that, but I think we do need to adapt our tools and approaches to acknowledge that. And then a training gap in the sense that most people today who are multi-solving, I think, are doing it by instinct and they're doing amazing things, but there isn't really a place to learn from one another and create sort of a sense of a field of practice. And I think there's huge opportunities there. And so with that, Fernando, I think we should turn it to Q&A. And thanks everybody for your attention.
Thanks, Pat. Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen then. And you can use the same link to come the Q&A here. You can ask your questions to Pat. I'm just going to activate this. So maybe Megan, can you put again the link to Poll Everywhere in the chat? And we already have 2 questions here. Pat, maybe we can start with those 2.
Yeah, those are great ones. Yeah, well, some of the things that have to be sacrificed are not really sacrifices. One of them is people's attachment to their identity as experts. You have to contribute to multi-solving. What I've seen is you do need to be an expert in your field and what you know is needed, but you need to be a learning expert, right? Who understands the boundaries of what you know and is just really curious about what other people know. And if you're too attached to being a narrow expert, you're not a very good multi-solver. The other thing that often needs to be sacrificed is attachment to that sense of urgency that a lot of us feel. And this is a real tension, actually, because multi-solving depends on quality relationships between parts of a system. It can only move at the speed of trust, and yet we're obviously in crisis situations around the world. And so I believe that it's a matter of going slow to go fast, and that building these relationships pay off. And I've seen that, but that is hard. That can be hard.
Sorry, I'll pick this one. And guys, don't forget that you can upvote or downvote questions so Beth can answer the most popular ones, I would say. So this one, Beth is asking, do you use group model building, community-based system dynamics?
Yeah, I would say that the closest project to that was the one I was referring to in Milwaukee that was hosted by the Metropolitan Sewerage District, where, and I would again shout out to Chris Soderquist, who was our partner in that, which was very iterative with a bunch of stakeholders across a whole bunch of parts of the city. We haven't, and there was a choice. That project was pretty successful in terms of helping that community get behind green infrastructure. And we had funders who were interested in replicating that around the country, and I chose not to. And the reason was it was pretty slow and time consuming. And this was close to 10 years ago, but already I was feeling a pretty strong sense of urgency And so I live in that tension between what people on the ground need to move fast and the expense of really detailed system dynamics models. And I might be, I don't know, speaking out of school in church or something, but I bet some of you have that that sense of tension too. So anyway, the short answer is no, we're tending towards simpler things like flower, and we're piloting some others that are super simple, often pencil and paper exercises for a world that feels in disarray. Yeah, so the business side, we are really fortunate to be embarking on a 2-year research project supported by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which is about this question. And it's connected to what I said about how it's hard for people doing multi-solving to document and share their impact. So we don't have a great answer to that, but we do have a research agenda around it. We think there's a really big need for simple tools that help people on the ground who are doing this relationship-based multi-sectoral work to notice what changes. I saw one of the questions was like, some of those examples seemed accidental. And I think that's actually really true often. People are either operating on instinct or, you know, somebody happened to measure something. We think that by formalizing the steps that start actually with really good baselines and a really broad suite of indicators, like we tell people to look for changes outside of their direct theory of change. You know, it's a parks program, but what's happening in the schools, or what's happening to jobs, for instance, and to start like measuring that from the beginning. But there's, for people who work in evaluation, there's all sorts of challenges of attribution, because these are complex changes that usually no one person accomplishes. So we have some ideas that we're going to try out, and a vision of a literal app in your pocket on your phone for people doing this work that helps them track and then share and explain both the qualitative and quantitative things that shift as a result of multi-solving.
Thanks, Pat. The next one here. Okay, this was just answered. These two. Here's some Davis advocate. Have you seen multi-solving fail, and why?
Yeah, I want to think about that for a minute. I would say that one part of our approach, which you could call a bias, has been to start with bright spots of multi-solving success on the theory that there's something a group of people are doing differently that others could learn from. So we have done less research that I think would lead us to those the examples that you name. I could see the value of it. What we have seen in that looking for bright spots is kind of interesting, that we see them everywhere we look at all scales. We've done global scans. We did a global scan for multi-solving at the intersection of climate change and health. So we find them everywhere we look. And one thing that has led us to realize is that there isn't a formula for multi-solving. We say sometimes it's more of a way than a what. It's a set of attitudes and approaches. And so I guess what I'm working my way around to say that we see lots of collaborative approaches that we would say are not multi-solving. And some of them have success maybe, and some of them fail. But the 3 criteria, and in this research project I mentioned, we've been forced to get more concrete, like how do you know it when you see it? And there's 3 things that we see. One is an attention to equity, measured by actually taking more time or spending more money if it's required by equity. So getting beyond kind of the words to actually being willing to slow down or spend money to make equity happen. Silo crossing, so like deliberately how many sectors are involved is another criterion. And the third one we think of as solidarity, which is resource sharing, so money, knowledge, relationships being shared in all directions. And so I think for us, it's more of when we see those three characteristics, we're really interested to watch what happens. And then we know there's a lot of work that on the surface might look like multi-solving, but doesn't have those three characteristics.
Sorry, I was talking to myself.
That's okay.
I'm picking this one just because this audience here is very a lot of system dynamicists. So maybe can you answer according to your experience, how the system dynamics allow for quantitative supported to pick up the most feasible interventions for addressing multiple goals?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I feel like I've seen that. And maybe I would flip it a little bit and say that what I have seen system dynamics do is allow people to explore alternative investments, some of which produce a narrow set of goals and others of which, so you might say sort of maximize for one objective, and others of which have the potential to improve multiple goals. And I've seen system dynamics help people broaden their kind of boundaries of what matters, and be able to articulate and make the case for why the multi-solving investment is the one to go for. And I think I've seen it help people understand that they have more allies than they expected. So that's the nature in which I see system dynamics helping people reframe their thinking toward multi-solving. Often the most feasible interventions are actually based on where the strongest relationships are. And so I think that is like a huge leverage point. And if system dynamics could be used to strengthen those relationships and therefore make more interventions possible, that could be a huge benefit.
Thanks, Bet. I'm going to let you maybe pick one or two last questions, Bet. We do have a few ones here.
Okay.
If you want to answer, I'm just scrolling down. If you want to answer any of those, let me know.
I'll try. Well, I do have thoughts on what would be the best way to translate multi-solving into different disciplines. And should there be one universal terminology? I think there I would just elaborate on this sense that we have that multi-solving is an approach that actually is kind of agnostic about the particular content. And so the things about the approach are that it is, say it's highly iterative. It often starts small and grows organically. And the way that it grows is usually by people noticing systems change. And noticing that is what brings in new partners, new money, new energy. So think about in Warm Up New Zealand, people learning that there were health outcomes of this energy efficiency project and that bringing in new partners. So starting small and using learning and evaluation to grow is one thing. Stepping away from the role of expert is another part of that project, of that set of approaches. This deep commitment to solidarity, which another way I would say it is that the problems that matter to you matter to me as your partner in multi-solving. And you might contrast that to what we sometimes see and people call transactional thinking. And that might be the climate movement that wants community support to get legislation passed, but then kind of disappears from all the other problems that might be facing a community. Multi-solving is the opposite of that. And it has the patience to show up. Think of it as the labor movement showing up for climate, the climate movement showing up for labor, and so on. So anyway, I think that I agree with this, the question sort of asking about a universal approach, and we're really trying in our research to do our best to kind of reflect that back to leaders and say, we think these are the 4 or 5 things that make multi-solving what it is. Are we getting it? What are we missing? And the reason for that, like focusing on the universal, partly is that we think that's what's going on. It's multi-solving is very site specific. So if you try to figure out like multi-solving for bicycles versus multi-solving for orchards, you're looking at the wrong level of detail, I think. I think the right level of detail is, how are people treating each other? The other reason is, and I keep alluding to this, and I think we started with that word cloud about what's vulnerable. Like, we don't have the luxury of a lot of time, and there's very few of us systems thinkers and system modelers relative to all the communities, businesses, governments that need help. So things that are universal and can be applied in any context that's where I think the effort should be at this stage. So that's another part of, for me, of the appeal of looking for generalizable principles or universal insights.
Thanks, Pat. I'm gonna let you choose one last question here because I didn't take some time from you at the beginning. So I'm just scrolling down again. If you see any that you'd like to answer, I see someone with some positive votes here.
Let's think about that one. What are some facilitation strategies and questions to support a conversation around bundling vulnerability? I suspect that people on this call, have endless insight into this, because I think it really is not simple, but what our field and all of our mentors have been working on for decades now. I think of the Society for Organizational Learning. I think of the 5th discipline, those key drivers of effective inquiry, right? That's what leads to solidarity, is like, what's keeping you up at night and how does that fit with what's keeping me up at night? Mapping in all of its various flavors, like people, as I talked about all of those barriers to multi-solving. Those are really all barriers that are artificial, that are created by the way we divide the world up into systems, into silos. And when we know that the underlying systems are whole and complete and connected. So I think our field has so much to offer in just the techniques for people to see what are the connections between the silos that they live within. I'll just add one last question, and maybe we can even finish on this. I find that, and I learned this from our partners at the Partnership for Southern Equity. One of their tenets of how they work, they call it values-based organizing. So they start with people's values. And a really interesting question is, where are people frustrated in being able to enact their personal values when it comes to the silos that they're existing within? And one example I think of regards to that was a guy I met whose job was to basically fundraise for really large urban conservation projects. And often those were things like parks. And he had a personal value of equity and justice. And he was seeing how his organization's work was really successful in one way of creating amazing parks, sometimes in disinvested places. But then, and I mentioned this with that systems map, it set up communities for gentrification and displacement, which was very counter to his personal values. And he knew that within his silo, a conservation organization that worked on parks, he was pretty powerless to bring his own values to life. But with a wider set of partners, including those who knew about affordable housing and job training, there was a different way to think about structuring projects. So I would just offer that question of like, where do the silos that people live within prevent them from living out what are their own deeply personal values? Is that a good note to end on, do you think?
Yes, thank you so much, Beth.
Sure.
This was great. I'm just gonna move on to my presentation again here. Before everyone leaves, I'm just gonna ask for people's feedback. I'm gonna send you a link to your inbox, so you can just press on that link and give us some feedback and help us improve. Thank you so much, Pat. This was great and insightful for me, and I hope that everyone's here and in the audience thought the same thing. I see that some thank you notes in the chat, Pat, so you can also browse a little bit and see some people praising you. And yes, thank you so much, everyone, for showing up. I look forward to seeing everyone in the next one. As soon as we get some news, I'll share with you all. And the recordings will be available in the website. I'm also going to share with you the link so you can share with your friends. And also some people asked me about the materials that Beth was showing in the slides and other links. I'll ask Beth if we can share the slides and also share the links that she was presenting through email. So don't worry, you'll get some
Sounds good
on this. Thank you so much again. Beth, any remarks? Closing remarks?
No, thanks everyone. It was fun to be with you and think with you. I think we could have gone on another hour. That's my only regret. But yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you so much then.
Okay, bye.
Bye everyone.